Hello and welcome to StrandKit for Blender, the hair, fur and dynamics library. The launch is today, so I'm here to show you what's in there, what's in the kit, how you can use it, what you can use it for, and all the customization options you can go through as well. I can't do it all in one video. It's too much to go through. There will be more specific, more specialized tutorials for more specific areas, I think. But this one is just to show what's in there. How to use it, because each one of these can be used in pretty much the same way. So it's going to be a very similar workflow, whether it's going to be a hair system or a fur system. Even the cards, they work pretty much the same with the scattering system. So what we can do is let's just start with some hairstyles, right? We can just drag and drop this. Let's open up this panel. I split it in geometry node setups and hair preset collections. Just in case you want to see how I set these images up, right? I can imagine sometimes it doesn't look exactly how you want it to be yet. You have to do some customizations. And then these systems just show you how I set them up, right? It can help. But basically, these are geometry node curves. So what you do is, let's just do a 10-second tutorial on how to set it up. Select your emitter object, what you want your hairs to be on. Shift A, curve, empty hair. Move from object mode to sculpt mode. We could go to the density here, the density addition of hair, because that allows us to set a minimum distance, 0.1 perhaps. And then we can just add new hairs, right? These are now beautiful hairs. And we can really just pull the tips out with this little tool here, and that's going to allow us to just drag them out a little bit. Maybe we want some longer hairs at the bottom here. Maybe we want this hair to be a bit longer as well. Maybe we want a bit shorter on the top, just so we can show everything. And then you can just comb it all however you like it. Right, for example, I like my comb to be like this. And if it goes in your emitter, you can always turn on your collisions. There we go, beautiful. And set up a very simple groom setup to play around with StrandKit. Right, so maybe something like that. Then just drag and drop the StrandKit hair types, right? It's from 1A to 4C, and 1A being more straight and more glossy type hair, and 4C being more rough hair, usually with higher melanin concentrations. And we could just drag and drop these on there. Now, by default, it will disappear, which is not what you want, because you have to set your sculpt object. Now, all the tweaks for all the geometry node systems will take place in the modifier panel. Of course, that is where geometry nodes customization takes place. So let's set our sculpt object by default to be our sphere, and you can just eyedrop that here or in your outliner. Both work fine, and then your system will be added. To see how it looks, let's just set our viewport density to 1 for a second, and let's go to rendered view. And there we go. This is, for example, our more Afro 3C styled hair. By default, I did enable some tip colorization because I like it. I don't know why. And you can just change the color, for example. If you want more blonde tips, you can do that. And by default, that will just add the entire type of hairstyle onto your plane curves without any difficulties, right? Quite easy. Now, the first option here, system scale, is something that you will see in every geometry node setup pretty much, right? And it basically defines how big your object is in the StrandKit system, all right? If I set this scale to be lower, your object will be lower as well, and your hair type geometry nodes will treat it as if the object is smaller as well. So if I set this to be smaller, you can see our hair curls and everything becomes bigger, right? I hope that makes sense. Our curls become bigger, and we may have to just set a higher density, 50,000 perhaps, but those curls really become a lot bigger, as you can see. And you can set your interpolation distance to higher as well, 0.4 maybe. It'll cover more of your object. Beautiful. And if I set this to be 5,000 again and set my system scale higher, you can see those individual curls are going to become much, much smaller, as you can see. And that is just a very easy slider to control the overall scale of every single hair types that is in there. All right, so now we have very tight looking curls, nice coily look of the hair. So that is really how easy that is. Now you can also tell, and let me just decrease this value for a second. And the next two steps, you can actually toggle between cycles and Eevee. Now, before you do that, I would recommend to turn on custom hair resolution first. Otherwise, it may just be a bit heavy on your computer, because shading this for Eevee means that we're switching it to a mesh-based shader instead of a hair-based shader. Principled hair BSDF isn't really a thing in Eevee, so we're switching it over to a mesh. And that means that also if you check this, cycles to Eevee switch, you can actually export your hairs as a mesh now, right? Which can just be very easy, right? If we go to render now, you can see that it becomes completely white. And the reason why that is because once we turn this switch, we can no longer shade this based on melanin concentration. We shade this on direct coloring. Scroll to the bottom here with me a little bit to the material setting. Those direct coloring, this you can enable that for cycles as well if you like that. But this will be turned on by default if you switch to Eevee. And that means that your colors here will be the colors that your hairs will have, right? So if I change this to be darker, more of a black color, you can immediately see that it becomes darker as well. Let's make this more of a black value tint, right? Everything becomes more and more dark as we go along, all right? Beautiful. So that is just what that switch does. I'm going to leave this as cycles for now, because I like the principled hair BSDF a lot. So the rest of this, I'm going to assume that you can just play around with, like clumping, curling, frizzing. I set up each system for each hair type individually because, well, sometimes you need fuzz hairs as well, that are hairs that are more, well, pointing out and adding some nice additional realism there. So you can see a fuzz hair tab here as well, the probability of these hair radius for fuzz hairs and normal hairs. It's all packed nicely into one system that matches that hair type perfectly. So let's try some other ones as well while we're at it. Let's try, for example, and before I'm going to head into the twists and the braids, whatever, let's just try the short tapered 4C style. On sphere, of course. You can see by default, let's set our viewport density to 1 for a second. This is much shorter hair, right? And that is because we have our hair length here to replace the original hair length. So if you want this to be longer, 0.3 maybe, set it to 0.3. If you don't want it to replace your hair length, just turn it off completely and you will have your original beautiful looking hair. System scale 5 maybe, becomes more tightly coiled hair. And the default was looking quite fine, to be honest. Make this more gray. You can add a gray hair probability because, well, it happens, right? We grow old and I'm thankful for that, you know. We can just crank this up to 0.2. You have more gray hairs in here now. Crank this up to 1. You have even more gray hairs. You can see it becoming more gray and gray and gray. And then you can also set the values for your gray hairs, right? So the higher these values, the more white they're going to be. If I set this to 0.5, it's going to look way more white. 0.1 is going to be a bit less. And you can really just set that. And if you don't want a lot, but a tiny amount, set this to 0.1, for example. And you'll have some nice gray strands going through your beautiful hair. All right. Beautiful. Let's have a look at dreadlocks next. Oh, that will be fixed once this is launched. Scalp object, there we go. Dreadlock viewport density 1. And there we go. We have dreadlocks with some beautiful connections to the scalp as well. So yeah, that is just how easy it is. Change your dread shape, the thickness, right? You can make it way more thick. And you can change whatever here where your dreads starts to form. For example, if you wanted to start at the very end, set this to 0.8, and your dreads will first be hair and become dreads more and more later. You can set this to 0.2, and it will start right at the scalp, for example. Very, very easy. Now let's try to look at, let's do twists maybe. Quite cool. And set the sphere object there and set this to 1. And now we got some twist hairs going on, right? Which are basically twisting hair strands. And the fun part here is that this is actually based on your surfer's geometry. All right. And that is something that I did on purpose because I think it is cool, the patterns that there are in these type of hairstyles, twists, braids, stuff like that. The patterns are really cool, so I want you to be able to customize your own patterns. And that means that this pattern is based on the face geometry of your sphere. So let's add a decimate geometry here, and let's set this collapse to 0.5. You can see that this is going to actively follow the new geometry, right? So if I set this to 0.25, you can see that the faces that are formed because of this decimate modifier, they are actually the guides for these hair strands, for these twists, right? As you can see. And if I crank up the value of these twists to be a lot more, 15,000 maybe, you can really start seeing the patterns and the divisions, the separations between each of these twists, and you can get that really nice pattern. And this also means that if you customize your own scalp geometry, all right, to follow the exact shape, the face shapes that you want your hairs to be expelled from, then you can set up your own cool patterns for these twists as well. Now, next up, let's just do a nice afro style hair scalp here. Beautiful, 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 right? More afro, rough afro styled, fuzzy afro hair. In quite a cool manner with, of course, the same customizations, right? Go through them, customize whatever you want. Beautiful. Now, I also want to highlight these 360 waves for a second, okay? Because it's quite a fun one to play around with. For that, I'm going to change my groom to be more tight to the surface, right? I can just shrink my hairs like that. I can just shrink it. Beautiful. And I can add a little bit more density that I set to match length and shape of the other hairs. And we can just add more where we want them to be more. Like that. Just a quick kind of version of my of my groom. It doesn't look great, but it will do the trick, I think. And let's just move everything away from the surface, but keep it nice and tight. And this groom looks horrible, but thankfully StrandKit will take care of that a little bit. So if I drag and drop this on there and set the scalp object here, you can see that it already looks a lot better. And we can really set the viewport density to be higher. And that already looks like quite an interesting wave pattern, right? Maybe more density though. There we go. Beautiful. And you can completely change the way this looks, right? So the pattern scale, maybe you want some larger waves. You can crank this up. Maybe you want tighter waves. You can set this to 1. There we go, looking quite interesting. You can rotate your entire pattern. Of course, if you like that, let's set this to 50, for example. You can see it will change the entire direction of your wave pattern quite beautifully. Let's go ahead and do some edge hairs, right? And the fun part with edge hairs is that I really want this to be something easy. Okay, so what we can do is just set your 3D cursor somewhere on the surface where you want your your edge hair to start. Add a new Bezier curve, go into edit mode, delete your vertices, and just draw a new curve on your surface, right? Set this to surface. That will make sure that your curve will always be on the surface. Let's say this is the shape of my edge hairs that I want. Beautiful. And let's go out of that and just rename this to edge hair, I guess. And then we also need a curve for the spawn points, right? Let's just move this curve so we can see it slightly outside of the surface. And then we can just duplicate that. Tab, go to edit mode and delete everything. And let's just draw the spawn curve now, right? So let's draw this right about there maybe. And this is going to allow us, move it outside a little bit. This is going to allow us to combine these curves into an edge hair system, right? So let's drop our, I'm going to hide my emitter for a sec, just so I don't accidentally drop it on there. Let's drop it on this curve. There we go. And select that. And then we have a scalp object that is going to be our sphere there. And then we've got a hair spawn curve. That's going to be the other profile we just made. And set the quantity up and you'll get a nice looking hair curve system. Beautiful, right? And these are now edge hairs. You can set your quantity, your interpolation distance. You can even set the random start offset, right? Just so those start points don't align perfectly. You can add a tiny bit of offset looking like that. Quite cool. You can change the clumping. You can change the subclumping, right? If you want this tight or not, you can change the curls, make it straight, whatever. You can even roll your endpoints, right? Roll length. You can roll them up if you want them to be out of the surface a little bit, right? Or more rolled into itself. Quite easily change your thickness, change your resolution, whatever, right? Very easy. And you can just at any point change the shape of that curve to be different, right? Move it here. You can even extrude those endpoints maybe, right? I can extrude it, and we could just move it here, you know. Just do what feels right, and you'll have a nice edgier system, as well as for your spawn point curve. Of course, if you change this, it will change where your hairs are spawned from. It is really that easy. And if you want more of that curve to spawn hairs, you can go to your edge hair curve and increase the interpolation density. Right there we go. It will interpolate on your entire curve. Isn't that just cool? Now let's just move to perhaps some fur, right? Let's add a new system of hairs, sculpt it. Let's add a little bit of a density with 0.1 maybe. There we go. Let's add some fur. Beautiful. Let's groom it slightly, you know, just a little bit. Just so it matches the shape a little bit more maybe. Something like that. Quite cool. And I think I want some longer hairs as well, maybe. I think. And just, you know, pull those tips out like that to create some longer hairs. It is not really that hard. The grooming part is quite easy. And then we could just, you know, comb it a little bit. Make it look interesting, I suppose. Beautiful. Now the fur, we can also just drag and drop, right? For a bear. Drag and drop, set your sculpt object, and you've got bear fur. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Maybe I should have done a better trim here. Maybe we should add some more hairs. Maybe we should add a tiny bit more density. Set our shape here to match, and then we can add some more hairs there. Beautiful. Just so at least our silhouette is covered, you know. I think that will be smart. There we go. And there we go. Right, that looks probably a lot better. There we go. Yes, maybe a bit more there. And you could tell just how easy this is to set up a fur pattern, right? Quite easy. Maybe add a little bit of length on top here as well. Just drag it out. You know, do what you feel like you want to do. It's really that easy. And there we go. Some fur for a bear. Okay, now as well as for the hairs, as for any fur system, you can change that system scale here. Make it lower and your entire system will be treated to be smaller. All right, make this bigger, 7, and everything will be tighter packed. And everything will be treated on a larger scale, like a big bear. All right, and that's looking quite beautiful. Now here as well, of course, we've got these switches for EV and cycles, custom hair resolution, cycles EV switch, and then of course it's going to be shaded based on your color here, your direct coloring basically, right? So you can really change that to be something more light or even blue, you know. If you really want blue stuff, you can make a blue bear. Why not? I'm not here to stop you. And change all of this as well. Right, interpolation, clumping, curling, wet and dry values. Bear fur can be wet and dry. We can make this completely wet by setting this to, well, one is going to be dry and wet's going to be fully 0, right? So now we have all wet hair, and that means it's going to be clumping more. The roughness plays an effect there as well. The more wet it is, the less roughness your hair will show. It will be more glossy or reflective, right? And it really all changes as well. Interesting, isn't it? We can do the same thing for bison fur, right? So bison fur is quite cool. It's quite thick and quite defined, maybe. We can crank up maybe the system skill just slightly and, well, maybe trim it slightly so it's not as long, right? So you can see just how easy everything is here to change and manipulate your hairs, right? The system skill does a lot. The rest of these values do a lot as well. If you don't want clumping, you don't want clumping, you know, you just want more fluffy hairs, you can totally do that. And if you don't want curling at all, you can just turn it off really quickly and see the effect right away. Then you can change your entire color, your highlight probability, your highlight color. If you want more light hairs in there, you can totally do that. If you want more green highlights in there, I don't know why, but you can totally do it. More of a warm color, you can make that happen as well there. And this is all driven, animal hair is mostly driven or based on melanin as well, which means that the higher we set this, the darker our entire fur system will be. Set this lower and it will be much lighter, and you can really play around with these values as well and the noise levels there. And then we've got a colorize to change a little bit of the main color, right, based on a noise pattern. It's going to add dark and dry patches. If I set this all to 1, you won't really see a difference in the coloring. If I set this to 0 and 1, you will see some nice changes, right? Just some nice light patches and dark patches. And that's going to be the same for roughness values and radial roughness values. They all change over your texture to add realism. Beautiful. Now, this is one of my favorites, the fur cat long, because I actually based this off our 2 cats at home. Right? We have 2 cats, Siberian cats, long-haired cats with very silky, smooth hair. So I wanted to recreate that in a cool way, right? So let's set this to 7, maybe. You can really see how cool that looks. Maybe it can be slightly shorter. There we go. So this is really the fur they have around their necks, right? The cool coats they have to keep warm in Siberia, even though we're not there, but it's fine. And the fun thing is, if your cat has a specific pattern, right, you can, with very much ease, apply that to your hair too. Right, in the material setting of each one of these fur systems, we have a custom texture box, right? So if we enable that, your hair will become black. The reason why is it will turn on direct coloring, which means it will basically take these colors and apply them in a direct way. And we can set a sample object here from our scalp. Let's say you texture your scalp, right? That's the usual thing you do. UV map name, UV map, texture ID, let's go with, I didn't even texture this, of course, because when did I do that? And then we can just add a new texture here, new material, image texture, let's name this kitty, right? Kitty, beautiful new image, and usually I will just save it right away in my image editor here, kitty, image, save as kitty. And then we can just apply this here or not, doesn't matter. Just make sure you have it selected and go to texture paint. And now we can paint the texture of our cat, right? Maybe we want some white lines maybe. Let's see, let's go to solid view so we can see what we're doing. Beautiful fur patterns, and this really looks more like a water company logo than it does a fur pattern. But it doesn't matter, right? So just save your image, save, go to rendered view, enable your hair, and go to your materials, and let's set the texture to be kitty, right? And now you can see that your hair, let's add a little bit more density before we really take a look at that. You can see that the hair that goes along those texture white areas will pick up that white color as well. Right, and it's just a really easy way to get a texture into your fur by, well, 3 simple steps really, right? Quite easy. Beautiful. let's take a look at some other ones and the rest of the library as well, because there's so much to go over. It is hard to pick what to show and what not. Let's go with the sheep one. Is actually one of my favorites too. Let's set this to be there. And you can see we got a nice, beautiful sheep pattern here. Maybe the hair is a bit too long to be sheep, so let's set this back to 1 and 0.6, 0.5. That looks a lot better. And now we have sheep fur, right? With the settings customized beautifully. Change the melanin. If you want a lighter sheep, you can set this to 0. It will be more whitish. Set this to 0.8. It will be more brown. And if you set this to 1, it will be more dark even. Right? And change these colors as well to add a little bit of a tint to that color. Right? It will change it slightly. Excuse me. So that's sheep. You know, customize everything. And let's do, maybe we should do one more. Maybe we should do feathers as well here. Feathers, that was the collection. I should have done the geometry nodes. There we go. Geometry nodes. And let's set our scalp to be sphere. And now we've got feathers, right? Set our density to be 50 maybe. And now we've got a beautiful thick feather pack for our system. Now this is a very much tweakable as well. And one thing that you probably need to know is that the feather hair quantity will change how realistic this will look, basically. From a distance, this is totally fine. And this is quite easy on performance. But if you crank up your quantity here to, let's say, 70, it will be a bit tougher. But if you zoom in, you get way more detail in your actual feather. And if you set this to 150, you'll have even more detail, as you can tell. But really, the original value work for a few more from a distance, and you can tweak all these values that you want. Let's say you want some white swan feathers, whatever. You can just crank all this more to the gray-white areas, something like that. You can have some dark spots, and there's so much customization in here that it is just you can spend quite some time just playing around with color combinations and bumps and feather shape settings and whatever. It's quite a lot of fun to play around with. So let's go to some hair cards now, right? Because StrandKit does also include a hair card scattering system. Excuse me. If I drag and drop that on here, it will immediately add hair cards to our object. Let's set the sculpt object to be sphere. And there we go, right? So we got hair cards, beautiful. We can interpolate them and we can add way more. If you have some overlap issues, some dark values, your light paths, transparent passes just need to be a little bit more. There we go. And you can fully customize this system, right? You've got your things for hair shape, which means the width of your hair. You can make this a lot wider. There we go. Change the hair, random hair length. I'm going to put that to just 0.1 maybe. You can make this clump or not clump, right? In a beautiful manner. Change the resolutions. Here as well, you can change the general system scale, right? Which really just changes the size of your hairs. Excuse me. You can align them to your scalp. If I set this to 0, you'll see that the starting points of these hairs will all be slightly random. If I set this to 1, it will be more smooth. Let's see if I can crank up the length a little bit more. Let's create some more length. Beautiful. Hair cards are always nice if you have some long hair, I suppose. Beautiful. And we can just groom this in a way where it looks interesting to us. Maybe something like that looks interesting. Who knows? Who knows at this point? And let's go to rendered view. And we got some hair cards. Maybe it's too dense now though. So maybe set this to 5 or 15 maybe. Maybe we open up the hair a tiny bit more. Right, so we still have some short hairs there. It's fine. Some long hairs there. Just gonna groom this so it looks interesting. I don't know what looks interesting, but I think this looks quite cool already, right? It looks really nice and realistic, and that's because our hair card, can I open up the shader for a second? Hair card scattering material, hair card scattering material, there we go. consist of 6 maps. We've got diffuse, start mask, depth, we've got roughness, specular, and normal. And we have more than 1,000 hair cards, each of which has a color, start mask, depth, roughness, specular, normals, right? So the entire kit for the entire haircut library is very, very large, right? And the reason why is simply because we have hair types. If I just open up a new one, maybe you can see what I'm going for here. These are packed into this actual file, but if you get the full version or the hair library version of StrandKit, you will get a full-on library, right? And this is what it looks like. You've got from 1A to 4C. If you open one up, let's go for maybe a 3B curly, make it brown. Then we have thickness values, right, from 1 to 10. I usually like 5 or 3 quite a lot. 5 maybe, density 100. I'll just copy this folder. And then we can just set this color as our new textures here. Let's just see how it's going to look like a start mask as well. You can already see some changes going on here. The depth. Then we've got a roughness map as well. Roughness. Then we've got a specular, of course, as well. Specular. And then we've got a normal map too, which is one of the most important parts here. Normal. And now I already mentioned here that each time you add a new image, set your color space back to non-color right away. There we go. And now we really have curly hair, right? Isn't that cool? And maybe this looks a little bit weird here, the short hairs. So let's just make everything a bit long. Beautiful. Beautiful. And you can, of course, just combine multiple of these groom systems with different hair cards, different densities, different thicknesses to really get the best of both worlds. And then we can still customize a lot of these values for these hair cards in the scattering system, of course, right? Like the shape, we can set a resolution. Maybe we can even get away with 12 and maybe even 2 is too little, maybe 4, right? So you can really have a low geometry based hair system. You can change the length, make it longer, shorter. You can change the width, of course. The wider you make this, the more of that curl pattern you will have in here. And you can really find one that works best for you. Then you have your texture X scale. Sometimes there's just a little bit of spacing besides your textures. And you can just scale it up a little bit to really make use of that texture width space. Here it gets cut off, as you can see. But something like here, we still capture all those hairs nicely in our pack, right? So you can just scale it up ever so slightly to make more use of the actual texture space. And then we can scroll down a little bit. We already covered the align to sculpt. If I set this to 0, those cards are just going to be rotated a bit more in direction that I don't really like them to be rotated in. Aligning them to sculpt will all rotate them a bit better towards the scalp, and especially the starting points of those hairs will really matter with that as well. So that is something to just keep in mind, okay? We can even add spiraling. It's not really something you will use a lot, but sometimes maybe it works out for you. You know, maybe sometimes you can use it. And you can set a custom hair root tilt in case you don't like how it originally looked. You can just rotate that a little bit. Excuse me. And then you can still set your material values, right? Let's say you don't like how much shadows there are inside of your hair card. You can actually crank up that value and you will have way less shadows going on in there. So you can just customize how involved shadows are there. And you can change the normal strength, change this to 1, change it to 0. You can see the difference it makes. You can change the hue, saturation value, roughness, and translucency is actually something quite cool as well. Because it adds that natural kind of shine in your hair. Don't overdo it, but if you have a light coming, for example, from the back of your object, right? An area light, for example, with a high value, like so, maybe a little bit larger in size. If we now go to the front view, we should be able to see that if we crank up that translucency more, we get more of that white shine through the hair as well. And if I set this to be even stronger, like 10,000, you can see we get that really natural edge shine of that sunlight there, right? And that is quite a beautiful extra look for these hair cards. Isn't that just cool? Excuse me. Then we can change, of course, some tip colorization as well. I just like that. We can add some color for the end points, right? 1.5. We get like pink. We can really just add a little bit of a gradient in there. Just why not, you know? Cool. That are the hair card scattering systems. Now there's also included a hair card rendering setup for each hair type. Isn't that beautiful? Now that means that for our curves, these are still usable for hair, right? You can still drag this on a hair, set your sculpt object, and it will still work as a hair system, basically, right? Even the 4C hairs, drag it on there. That was the collection. Make sure to do the geometry nodes, drag it on, set sculpt object, and you'll have a hair system that works with that hair, right? So let's see how it looks in the render. All right, there we go. Now the difference is that these hair systems are really made for hair card rendering. And that means that we would just hide this, and instead of the actual geometry node systems, we will just drag in the entire pretty much collection here, right? There we go. We drag it in and we get a perfect hair card rendering setup. There we go. Right? So you can turn on, or sorry, off instance here. And then you can just customize this however you want. You can set your custom colors. You can set your custom curling, your material values, your roughness, whatever. And you can even turn on values for rendering out your own normals, roughness, specular, depth, and start masks, right? If I turn on my normal rendering, set it to 1, you can see your normal map will appear, and this is what it will render for your normal map, right? So you can just turn each one of these on to render your own custom hair card and use that for other systems or use it in games. This is really I think the simplest kind of rendering system for hair cards that you're going to find in Blender, at least. So let's just take a look. We even have one for type 4C dreadlocks, which is quite cool. They will render out hair cards for dreadlocks, and you can still tweak it, change the colors. It works very, very well, if you ask me, right? You can add your own camera, make sure it's orthographic though, and just render it out in your own texture resolution, right? Beautiful. So let's take a look at the final step, I suppose. There is still a lot I haven't really covered, but it's fine. It's fine. I think the more you will use it, the more you'll find out. Now we're at the final part of StrandKit. I haven't covered everything, but I do have to cover this. It's the dynamics system, right? And it works for object-driven animations and armature-driven animations, as I will show you with this amazingly detailed tail rig here. Beautiful. So let's just do object first, right? Let's add some empty hair and let's just sculpt, add some density hair on this surface. Something like that. Beautiful. That already works. Let's just drag and drop the dynamics on there. Set the sculpt object to be your sculpt object. And there we go. We're already done. Now, for any system that you drag your dynamics on, you have to make sure that you unparent this to the emitter object. Okay? Alt-P, clear parent, that's it. And also, if there is already a surface deform on your object, on your curves, it usually will add that right away. It's not needed. We can turn that off or delete it because we already have that in our dynamics system. Okay, so just make sure that is not there. Now, if I play this, you can already see that something is going on, right? Something is happening. We can rotate this. Our hairs follow that motion in quite an interesting manner, right? We got actual dynamics of these hairs in a beautiful way. Okay, so let's just add a little bit more of these hairs. And the fun part here is this is completely completely workable. Is that a word? I don't know. It's in the same workflow as our other systems, which means that we can fully combine these systems, right? And it's a lot of fun. So what we can do is, for example, drag and drop this bear system on there, and just make sure that you have your StrandKit hair first, and then the dynamics. Set your sculpt object there, and let's just set the distance for interpolation to 0.5. There we go. Set the system scale to be a little bit lower, maybe higher. There we go. Set the viewport density to 0.2, maybe 0.1, whatever. And this fully works with our hair dynamics, right? If I now play this, it's going to be a little bit slower because we got a lot more resolution in our hairs now because of the bear thing, but it fully works with that bear fur, right? And I can even just go to random view, and let's set the bear fur back. And you can totally see how this works, right? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now, of course, this is still a very boring kind of groom setup, right? Of course, but we can change that. Let's set this back to 0, just to our original location, because that is where our groom is still located. And then we can just groom this a little bit in a cooler direction, I suppose, right? So let's make this a bit cooler. And let's add more density here as well. And let's remove some hairs from the sides, the back, the parts that I don't need right now. It's just what I'm going to remove. And let's just make this a little bit longer as well, so we have some more fun movements in our hair, I suppose. Something like that. It's quite cool. And we can set up our original groom positions like that. For example, make it interesting, right? And you'll just become like a groom artist if you're doing this long enough. There we go. And then we can just play this. You can see that those longer hairs will, of course, work differently with the dynamic system as well. And now it is quite high in keeping its original shape. But I can really just crank this down to 0.45 maybe. And you can see it, everything is sacking in a little bit. And everything will be just less likely to keep its original shape when we move this and when we move this around beautifully. And yeah, that's really as easy as it gets. You can change your gravity values. If you don't want gravity, you can just make that happen as well. And it will just follow that zero gravity feel beautifully. Now, of course, now we don't have collisions enabled, but there are collisions in the system. It just will make everything a slightly bit lower. We have simulation iterations and hair resolution here as well. Set the gravity back to 1, and let's enable collisions. And by default, that will enable collisions with the sculpt object as well, which is the emitter object, okay? And there's a separate part for your sculpt collision and for your collision collection, which is just a bit easier for everything. So if I play this now, you can see that it's not actually going to fall through your object anymore. And if I move this around, you will see that your hairs will try to stay on the surface a bit more. And this becomes way better if you have more simulation iterations. All right. So if you have your animation set up, you're happy with how it looks, before you render it, crank up your iterations a little bit, maybe your resolution a little bit, and then just bake it. So now the baking, sadly, there's no way to bake this within the geometry node tab in the modifier panel. So what you have to do is take a tiny glimpse at the geometry system here, where I made one little a little node here, pink, right? You can't really miss it. This is the system. You can have a look at it if you want. There's a lot going on in the simulation tab as well. But you can really just hit animation and bake your animation then. All right, beautiful. Now, the fun thing here is that we can actually simulate this with guides as well, right? Simulate with guides, and that's going to make it simulate using guide curves. So if I enable that, you can see the guides. If I set this distance to 0.15, we're just going to simulate less guides. For example, 0.1, and that's going to make it a lot lot easier on our system to simulate, of course, which is just beautiful. And if I disable this, the original curves will still follow that motion beautifully, right? Quite cool. So we can now just set our density way higher in our fur bear, back to 1, for example. And that means that our interpolation curves for our simulation will still be quite low, right? And that's just going to mean that we can basically almost just play this with loads and loads of hairs, and everything will actually be simulated as well. So obviously this is a version 1 of the dynamics. There will probably be tweaks coming. I'm looking to incorporate some self-collisions at some point. But for now, I think it gives you a lot to really play around with. Oh yeah, let's take a look at the tail as well while we're at it. Let's just delete this for now. We don't need it. Let's just add a quick empty hair for this as well. Sculpt mode, add some empty hairs on here. Yes, it is actually happening. And you can see that it's doing it in the rest position, which is important actually to mention, and I'm happy that I made this mistake, is that if you simulate based on an armature, make sure that before your actual animation keyframes, make sure that you just have some frames starting from your rest pose. So just go to pose mode, best pose, clear transform all, and make sure that your rest pose is the starting pose, just so your hairs have the option, the ability to move with your surface, right? So let's just go to our curves, and we can now add our asset browser dynamics on there, on the curves. Beautiful. And let's set, do we have 2 sets of curves? We do. Let's delete these, and let's add the curves on there. And let's set the sculpt object to be, of course, our plane. There we go. So nothing really changed. Make sure to, of course, hit Alt-P to clear the parenting, and set your object armature driven switch on, so it's now based on an armature, right? So let's see what that looks if we now play this, right? You can tell what is going on with those hairs. They are actually, let's cap our animation at 100. They're actually moving with the surface, right? In a very organic manner. Quite fun. And we can make those hairs longer, of course. We can really just crank these out with pull tips. Make this a bit longer. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Quite interesting, isn't it? And then we can just play this. It will follow the motion, right? Keep original shape, turn it lower, and it will actually swing more and more. Now there is, of course, wind as well, right? So I can just turn on my wind noise strength to 1, for example. You may not really be able to tell it now because we have a lot of movement going on, but if I set this to 5, we will have way more of that wind noise, and maybe the frequency is too high, so let's set this to 2. It will just move way more in a fun way, in a windy way, right? You have directional strength as well, and we can actually turn that to 1. Add a new empty object, plane axis, call this wind, for example, and then we can just set the directional wind here to be wind object, right? And set your strength to, let's say, 3. And then you can rotate your wind into, for example, the left direction. And let's hide the armature for a sec. You can see those hairs follow that direction of that empty object, how I rotate it, right? So you can set your own custom wind direction. You can have it move over time. And it adds a lot of value, I suppose, to your system here, right? Perhaps let's try adding a nice fur system here once again. Maybe the, what is a nice one to show? Maybe the lion mane, who knows? Oh, that's the collection. Make sure to do the geonodes here, lion mane. Let's set that to be on top, right? Before the dynamics sculpt object should be that. Then we move this to the left. And you can see this is already being animated like an actual cool system, right? Very, very beautiful. And this is even without the interpolation turned on. So we got quite a lot of hair already, and it's already animating quite beautifully. Right, let's set our line main fur back here. Lion. There we go. And it's actually looking quite interesting and beautiful, right? Keep original shape, turn it up if you want your original shape to be kept a bit better, right? Like that. Beautiful. So that was in, well, not really a nutshell, but as short as I felt like I could keep it while also showing most of what can be done. That was StrandKit. So I hope you enjoy it. Please, if you have suggestions or something doesn't work, please do let me know. I do want to make a lot of changes based on user experience, of course. So please do let me know. And yeah, have fun. Cheers.